Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for The Verdict.
As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. We have put together a special program today which deals with terrorism in America. And let me introduce my co-host and one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. Certainly topical.
Yes, terrorism in America is being revisited after the Oklahoma City bombing. We have a better view about it than most, but we're seeing it from a different perspective, and it's a fast-changing situation.
Well, and probably a good time for me to point out that we are taping this show on Thursday, just, 2 days after the incident took place in New York City, and this is a fast-changing series of events, and things could very well have changed significantly before you see this show. So we just want to point that out ahead of time so it doesn't appear to be outdated.
Yeah, we're going to do the best we can with our experts to kind of call it as we see it now, fully recognizing that things will be different as the days progress. I want to call up now something in the way of a clip that our viewers will have seen before, but it helps to put things in perspective. So let's take a look at some film we've got. Mick, of course, what we're looking at there is the Trade Center towers there after the first plane has gone in, causing just unbelievable damage. And there, as you know, that's the video of the second plane coming in, hitting the other tower. And I can remember where I was when I saw that, the feeling I had, not a lot different from the Oklahoma City bombing feeling. There goes the tower down, the first tower, causing unbelievable devastation. For all of us here in Oklahoma City, we dredge up very quickly and very dramatically some awful feelings. I know just watching that for the first time, I had a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, a lot of apprehension, but really a real sick, empty feeling in my stomach that I haven't had since the Oklahoma City bombing.
Well, I think it's a helpless feeling in one sense because you want to do something. That's our instinct, and there is a limited amount of things that we can do. And secondly, you know, I think we want to move on. I mean, that's our instinct to move on. But if the Oklahoma City bombing situation is any indication of how I'm going to feel personally this time, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yes.
And it never heals completely.
Well, we're going to progress. I am expecting to a feeling of vengeance. We're going to be hearing that word a lot. We're going to say, what can we do, and what can we do to whom?
Well, we have a great show lined up for you. We will welcome two recognized experts on world terrorism. We'll start that when we get back. You're watching The Verdict with Mick Cornett and Kent Myers.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an allied artist.
It's got to be around here somewhere.
Don't worry, we'll find it. Just calm down.
I swear it was right here on the desk.
All right, if I were a Will, where would I be?
It's the only copy. Without it, we're out $3 million.
I know.
Hey, accident
accidents happen. If a condom breaks
Or you have unprotected sex.
You have 72 hours to reduce
your risk of getting pregnant. It's called emergency contraception.
Got questions?
Call Planned Parenthood.
All children deserve a life of hope and love. But sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and we're ready to discuss the issue of dealing with world terrorism. Kent, why don't you introduce our guests?
We have two truly internationally known guests that are very knowledgeable in this area. On my left is Dr. Steve Sloan, University of Oklahoma professor for approximately 35 years, author of 7 books and literally hundreds of articles and speeches about terrorism. And frankly, one of 2 or 3 nationally known experts on terrorism, and he's right here on the University of Oklahoma campus and was kind enough to come visit with us today. Dr. Sloan, thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure being here.
On my right is a real CIA officer. David Edger is a 33-year veteran of the CIA and is still a CIA employee. He has served in the operations area for virtually his entire CIA career, attaining the 2nd highest rank in the agency in operations. He, in fact, supervised the worldwide operations of the CIA while he was in Washington. But he's a native Oklahoman and a graduate of both Oklahoma State University and the University of Oklahoma, and is now the CIA officer in residence here at OU. David, thank you for coming.
Glad to be here.
Let's jump right back to you, David, if we may, because I used the word operations 3 or 4 times, and our viewers are probably wondering, what, if you were in charge of worldwide operations, what were you doing? What do you mean by operations?
Well, basically, with us, operations means human intelligence collection from human sources as opposed to collection from technical sources. So I was in the espionage business.
You were a spy?
Well, I directed spies.
Directed spies, very good. You indicated when we were talking off campus that when you came to Oklahoma you had culture shock.
Well, I'm still in a little bit of culture shock. Just a few months ago I was a clandestine CIA employee, and now I'm a professor at the University of Oklahoma, so that's a bit of a shock.
Well, welcome home.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you back. Gentlemen, let's get right to the subject. We, of course, know what's happened several days ago and what's going on in our country. And Dr. Sloan, I'd like to ask you, some information that is coming across indicates that some of these people that did these bad deeds came into our country from Canada, maybe from other borders. Does stopping this portend tightening up our borders and making our own citizens more uncomfortable leaving and getting into the country?
It's a major problem because we pride ourselves on open borders, but as you know, we have a profound debate going on right now in terms of immigration, to place it in a broader context. Obviously, we don't want to close our borders. It's not within our tradition or our values. Physical security cannot possibly work in terms of the borders. One of the key aspects of this will be much more effective intelligence in identifying individuals and groups who might come on in to engage in the types of operations that we've seen. But one of the difficulties on that is we're dealing also with other people who have no track record. And even if we have the information to develop and have a watch list of people, leads to great complexity in terms of getting this information out, not only on the borders, but into the interior, to state and local police and authorities. So it's a very complex process, and will, by the way, of course, raise serious legal issues as we move on this new era in the U.S. immigration policy and U.S. border policy.
David, on the same subject, we read that several of these people were on watch lists, and they were determined to be on watch lists within 24 hours after the events occurred, but they weren't stopped from entering the country, nor were they stopped from boarding the airplanes. What can we do to have a better hold on keeping these people away from us?
Well, I think we have to be careful use of terms. What I've heard is that these people were they were recorded, they were indexed in the FBI Central Index, which, as you know, is a huge database that contains the names of many innocent people as well as people who are suspected.
And you and I may be in there.
We may very well be. I'm sure I am. The actual watch list that is used to keep people out of the United States is run by the State Department. And that watch list comes into play when you present your passport at an embassy around the world and say, I'd like to go to the States. If your name is on that watch list, you don't come in until the FBI says okay, and until you submit to a very thorough debriefing. These guys, as far as I know, were not on that kind of a watch list. And what I'm hearing on the television is they came in from Canada, so they would only need probably a visa for Canada and then just come right across the border.
Well, Steve, let's change the subject to airline security. We are hearing that our airlines are up and running now and the airports are opening, and yet security is going to be, of course, much, much tougher than it was before. What kind of increased security requirements do you anticipate being implemented?
It's going to be at all levels. One level, which I know David will comment on, there will be much more emphasis on collection of intelligence. The FAA, which plays a crucial role, is a consumer of intelligence, not a collector. And there's going to be much more closer coordination in that area and also on the state and local level to disseminate information.
So by that you mean the FAA wouldn't gather its own intelligence information on passengers, it would have to derive it from somebody else?
Basically, yes.
Yeah. But they've got to enforce it.
But they have to enforce it. Beyond that, it's a defense in depth. Obviously, we're going to have to increase our ability to provide effective security screens. And that has serious implications, not only in terms of will we use, for example, an Israeli model, in terms of interviews and so forth, to reconciling luggage to make sure that people match their luggage. It's going to create tremendous inconvenience. And then you're going to get into a very fundamental issue about paying and training those who mind the screeners, who mind the X-ray and magnetometer, to train them effectively, as we see in various European countries. Beyond that, the American public, I am concerned. In the short term, I think we'll accept these measures, which will come into play. In the longer term, we'll see if they have the patience and resolve. Beyond that, there are very technical aspects that are going to have to come into play in regards to not only training flight crews and so forth, but having much clearer identification of aircraft and so forth. We do have, by the way, capabilities which are open, including here in Oklahoma City, the Customs Aviation Center, which monitors the drug trade. We have AWACS and so forth, which raises military questions. But you're going to have to see, not only here, but internationally, a much tighter coordination. And that will be very, very, very difficult to do.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. We're discussing world terrorism. We'll be right back on The Verdict.
Yeah, campfire's a lot of fun. You get to make some friends. You get to do some cool stuff. Campfire's for boys too, not just girls. But hey, campfire's definitely for kids. So call the campfire office nearest you to join in on the fun. 'Cause let's face it, you're not getting any younger.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable, private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
Yesterday was pineapple.
You can say that again. On Broadway is Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company.
bringing our daughter here was one of the smartest things we've ever done.
I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of confidence. They helped me develop talents I never knew I had.
And it's fun.
On Broadway, Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company. Now enrolling in Edmond. Call 330-CAST. That's 330-2278.
Every day, in state governments throughout the country, crucial decisions are being made that affect the lives of children and their families. But as this process takes place, children are often left voiceless. When these children raise their hands to be heard, is anyone listening? There are people listening. They are child advocates. Join us and raise your hand for kids.
We're discussing world terrorism. We're visiting with Dr. Stephen Sloan, a professor in the political science department at the University of Oklahoma, and David Edger of the Central Intelligence Agency, who's also attached to the university now. Ken, where do we go from here?
When we stopped, we were talking about airline security, and one thing I wanted to ask David about is how do we balance the increased requirements for airline security, airport security, with our traditionally thought of rights to move around the country and not be infringed by government?
I think that's a good question, Kent, and I think it's one that we're going to probably experience in the very near future. We're all accustomed to a very minimum of checking being made on us as persons when we move around. For example, we don't expect police officers to come up and ask us to identify ourselves or say why we're in a particular area. That may change as we worry about terrorism. I can easily foresee a time in the very near future where we may actually begin to run the names of every passenger against those databases in Washington for internal flights. That's going to translate into long delays at the airport and less convenience for those of us that travel frequently.
Yeah, in other words, what you're saying is that the increased security and increased safety doesn't come free.
Absolutely not.
It comes at a cost.
And you're going to feel it.
I want to ask Steve a question and then ask David to comment on the same question. Steve, one thing my 13-year-old daughter asked me yesterday is, Daddy, are these over? Are these attacks over? What's your response to that for our viewers?
I think we're going to have to accept the fact that terrorism particularly is a protracted form of warfare. And there are no decisive victories. The real test for your daughter and for us is a question of national and international resolve. There will be additional attacks, and they may often be quite different from what we expect. And in addition, as we get involved, as we will, not only in terms of an overt military action, but in terms of long campaigns of counterterrorism, we could expect an possible escalation in violence from those who we are fighting. So what we are seeing, in a sense, is a profoundly tragic opening, I don't like the analogy, but an opening shot in a very protracted type of conflict, and one we're going to have to be living with, I think, for quite a while.
Now, we saw that in the Gulf War, did we not?
Yes, but in the Gulf War, and I know David could speak more on this, in many ways the Gulf War was a remarkable intelligence success because Saddam Hussein was not successful engaging in attacks against Americans in the United States and so forth. But I wouldn't equate it to the Gulf War. The Gulf War, we had time to prepare. We knew who the enemy was, right? We had the benefit of high-tech technology to apply, right, over a long period of time. This is a much more complicated war. In its sense, it's not the kind of war we like to fight. And unfortunately, that's a reality we're going to have to deal with.
David, what do you think?
I agree with Steve. I would devoutly hope that we will never see another event like what we saw earlier this week. But we've got to understand that if we strike back, and it's clear we're going to strike back, that's not going to be the end of it. Unfortunately, we are somewhat accustomed to very surgical military operations in the last few years, and I'm afraid this one will be protracted, and we have to expect the possibility of additional actions inside our own country.
Would you think this is going to be something where we send in the Marines, or is this going to be something where we push a lot of buttons?
I think it's probably going to be some of each. If we can identify the right people to go after.
Well, that raises another topic that I want to talk to Steve about initially and then ask you to comment on as you would like to. Both Secretary of State Powell and President Bush have said, I'm paraphrasing now, but we need to hold accountable not only the perpetrators, but those who hosted the perpetrators. That second part of that phrase is something that we haven't heard presidents or government officials say before. I think that's new. And do you think that the United States government will hold the host countries accountable for the actions of the perpetrators?
Yes, I do. I don't want to go beyond that because the kind of signal that'll come out, we'll have to see. But, you know, in the past, we have held states accountable for state sponsorship, most notably Libya, where you may recall with the bombing of the La Belle Disco a number of years ago where planes went in and launched an attack. I think we will hold people accountable and states accountable. The difficulty on that is it's not simply states that are going to be held accountable. There's an incredible support mechanism. It's a very complex environment out there to identify who to attack, to, among things, to break the infrastructure and logistical support. And in a sense, if we can spot the state, that's fairly easy because you have state organizations, state headquarters, etc. But when you go beyond that, in this war in the shadows, it's going to be more difficult to identify the targets, and as David said, to go on in and actually be able to dismantle these terrorist mechanisms that are deeply embedded in the societies.
Internationally, David, whose responsibility is it, or who will get the primary job of trying to determine who's responsible as a state? Has a state been responsible for doing more than simply hosting? Is that the CIA's job?
Oh, it's everybody in government's job, and it's not just inside the United States. I think you can expect that we're going to be talking to our allies around the world, particularly in the NATO countries and some of the friendly Arab countries, in an attempt to pin down responsibility. A lot will depend on what the records show about these 18 men that we now are told actually did the hijacking. Where did they come from? Who have they been in touch with? We'll follow those sort of leads along. But what I think is really going to be interesting this time is obviously we're not going to turn a blind eye to countries that are providing support.
Well, let's take a look at Osama Bin Laden's picture for our viewers, and then talk to him just a little about him just a little bit. Steve, we know he hates us. Tell our viewers why that person that's on the screen now, in your view, hates Americans and America.
Well, Osama bin Laden, among things, has issued earlier a fatwa, an order justifying attacks against Americans both domestically and overseas. In part, of course, it's very much tied in with U.S. involvement in the Middle East. He feels that our involvement, particularly in the holy places, in regards to Mecca and Medina and so forth, is sacrilegious. In part, it's also tied in regards to our support for Israel. In a more profound sense, I think he's verbalizing and acting on an assertion of Islamic extremism. I'm not categorizing Islam. I'm talking about a particular movement, Islamic extremists who look upon the West and its secular behavior and technology to be an aberration. And what in essence we're seeing now is a reassertion of very, very traditional feelings. And one has to try to look at the world through those eyes. It does not at all justify this tragic, horrible thing. But it's a deeply held belief, and it makes people be willing to commit suicide. And that's precisely, of course, what we have witnessed.
We're going to have to wrap it up there and have that the final word, but we're going to have you back for another show.
And we're going to.
We've been discussing world terrorism with Stephen Sloan and David Edger. And Kent and I'll be back with a few final thoughts when we return. This is The Verdict.
Hello, my name is Ted Smith. I'm president of the board of directors of the Oklahoma Disability Law Center. ODLC provides free legal services in civil matters to people with physical and mental disabilities.
I'm Mike Sykes, Vice President of ODLC. For more information, call
880-7755. The Oklahoma Disability Law Center provides high-quality legal services to people with physical and mental disabilities.
In Oklahoma, there are more than 1,600 children waiting to be adopted. They're of all ages, and for many, home has been a source of pain and conflict. They've dreamed of finding a better life and a loving family. Consider adoption. For more information, call 1-877-OK-SWIFT or visit the website www.okdhs.org. Adopt. It may be the toughest job you'll ever love.
Boy Scouts of America, where above all else, character counts.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities. Parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
We are wrapping up another edition of The Verdict. Today, in the light of national events, we discussed world terrorism.
Well, it was a difficult subject. It's a difficult time for us. Thank goodness we had good guests that could tell us about it, and we're going to have them back for another show in a couple of weeks. But there is a book that I'm aware of that I can certainly recommend to anybody. It was written by Rabbi Harold Kushner, and it's entitled When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And that's happened a lot in this country in the last 2 or 3 days. And Rabbi Kushner says we may not ever understand why we suffer or to be able to control the forces that cause our suffering. But we can have a lot to say about what that suffering does to us and what sort of people we become because of it. That's certainly within our control, and Oklahomans know how to do that and do it for the best. And I think there is a silver lining for us, and I think times will be better. And by the way, as a final thought from me at least, Rachel E. Myers, happy 13th birthday.
Well put. Well, thanks again to our guests, Dr. Stephen Sloan and David Edger. For Kent Myers, Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict. This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation, and also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma.